You are listening to I Am Interchange.
I am interchange.
I am interchange.
I am Interchange.
Fostering curiosity, education, and empathy by exploring the controversial and the provocative.
I am interchange.
As co-founder of the local Tea Party movement, Henry Kriegel is no stranger to political activism or the controversy that can surround it. Born of Eastern European Jewish immigrant parents who fled post-World War II Germany with their lives and little else, Kriegel is a first-generation American and a firm believer in the freedoms this country promises, providing some critiques of the governmental bodies sworn to protect them. I'm Tate Chamberlain, and in this podcast, talk show host and activist Henry Kriegel and I discuss his roots and values, politics, the pandemic, and the timeless and changeable state of this great union. This interview was conducted in October 2020, a little over a year ago. While circumstances and conditions have changed significantly since then, the issues and point of view shared is still relevant. Additionally, the views expressed by Henry are his own and not necessarily reflective of any organization with whom he has affiliation. What almost kept you from being here today?
The fact that it's election cycle and some of us are really working it very hard. And it's quite an amazing thing when you think about it that less than maybe 360,000 voters in Montana can shape the outcome of the U.S. Senate.
Tell me a little bit about your family.
My parents were born in Eastern Europe, in Eastern Poland. My mom was 12 years old. My dad was 19 when the Germans conquered Poland, and they took it in 2 weeks, as you might know. German tanks rolled through all of Poland to get to southeastern Poland where they lived. Mm-hmm. My dad, the oldest in his family, was told to leave with his uncle to go to the Soviet Union. My mom wound up going to labor camps. She was in, I believe, 8 different labor camps through the war. My dad ultimately came back and fought with the Polish resistance. They are sole survivors of their respective families. They knew each other as kids, obviously, and they immigrated to the U.S. to pursue what we had here in America, opportunity and freedom. So they came here, and so they got processed at Ellis Island, make sure they were disease-free. Probably a little more intense than the thermometer on my forehead and that I got when I walked in here today. They weren't given a choice, okay? It wasn't like, hey, guys, you know, here we are the Refugee Resettlement Program, and I can give you a passport and an airline ticket, and you can go to Israel, or we can take you safely to the United States. No, it was a little more extreme than that. My mom had to actually survive the aftermath of the Germans' defeat, and she had her adventures that took her to Paris, France, and she had to get approved by the rabbi to get her the slip to get out. And she actually got one of her childhood friends who was non-Jewish, one of those very passes as well, because her friend was so helpful to the family, she could not leave her behind. My mom was pretty doggone brave, you know? I mean, I got to give her hats off. She was really brave.
So a rabbi helped her? Yeah,
the rabbi kind of processed her transport papers. I don't know what they call them, but he had to actually approve the paperwork and prove that she was Jewish. Mm. Only Jews were processed this way.
As like a refugee?
Right, exactly. Yeah. And one of her friends was not Jewish, but she taught her enough Hebrew and told her how to get along. And the rabbi was very, very skeptical of the friend.
Oh, okay, but she vouched for her.
And she vouched for her, and the rabbi was questioning the friend. And after a while, my mom just got flustered and said, just sign that paperwork and give it to me.
And he did.
He did.
Your parents wound up in New York Ellis Island, New York City.
Eventually, they got into New York City. They had a distant uncle that sponsored them.
Okay.
Separately, they came. My dad wound up cutting fabric in 33rd Street in the Garment District next to Madison Square Garden. You might have seen visuals of this crowded downtown with guys in like shopping carts with these bars, you know, that hold clothing. Where they would wheel fabric. Okay, they'd cut them and wheel them down where they would make clothing at another location, or they use it to make draperies or whatever home furnishings. My dad was a cutter of the fabric in the uncle's store.
Was the store a cart that had the fabric on it that he would wheel around, or was it a physical store that people would go
It was
into?
a physical
Okay.
place where he used to cut the fabric. Okay, so he was a fabric cutter. That's
Yeah.
how he started out.
Yeah.
Cutting fabric. Got paid half the wages as his colleagues because the uncle, after all, sponsored him and thought he could pay him less.
There was kind of a back end.
Right.
I rubbed your back, saved your life. You owe me one.
Cheap, being cheap.
Yeah.
Really cheap. So my mom was really unhappy with it. My dad said, I'm not going to complain. Unusual for my dad. He was a big complainer. I'm not going to complain. I'm going to go off and do my own thing. So he got enough education to become ultimately an interior designer. He really wanted to be
Cool.
a teacher, but that was all basically aborted by the war. His education was over. I mean, obviously. And they came here, they had to survive economically. So he had to get whatever job he could and build himself up from there. So he became an interior designer. Then he opened up his little shop in Yonkers,
Okay.
and
yeah.
then which is right north of the Bronx. And then he moved up to New Rochelle, which is further north in the suburbs. And that store burned down.
This is in the late 40s, 50s.
He came over here in the late 40s, yes. And then as he was building his business, they raised 3 boys. And
you
I
were
was
one of them.
literally raised, I was the youngest. I'm the baby in the family. So my dad did his own thing, and my mom helped manage the business. And when I was a kid, raised by, we didn't call them nannies, but we called them maids, these black ladies who came up from Harlem.
At a hospital, or?
Yeah, inside Lyme Hospital. And one of my nannies was black. Her name was Maggie. And she loved me,
Your family came from displacement. Where should displaced people go?
That's maybe not necessarily an apples to apples comparison as to where you're going here. Now, where did he have going? What did they have for Jewish refugees coming to America? So they were in Ellis Island. They had to be processed there for a week or two to make sure, for a period of time, make sure they were disease free. Mm-hmm. So there were all kinds of support groups that came and provided hospitality, entertainment, so on and so forth. They were not provided any handouts. They didn't get welfare or anything like that. They had to go to work. They had to prove they had a sponsor, a place to live, and a job.
There was a lot of work to do if they wanted to become an American citizen.
Right. They had to work at it. So there was a Jewish community in New York, and that's where they settled, and that's where they stayed, and that's where they kind of forged their way.
Yeah.
And it was pretty humbling for them. They had a lot of property back in Europe, which was all seized. My mom's family in particular owned large farmlands, and that was all gone.
It was seized by the Germans?
Yep.
And it was never reappropriated?
No, because there was no real paperwork to prove ownership. There was no way for me to find that, no way for us to find it. Maybe one of my brothers did try to track it down. I don't know. But there was no way to get that back.
I can't imagine having that happen, just having everything taken away.
Yeah, not only having everything taken away, but everything taken away and you fleeing for your life.
Yeah.
And you're the only one left. My mother knew her family members were killed because her brother was killed 3 days before liberation, and her sister was shot on the way being liberated, on the way out of the camps. And she couldn't even go to the hospital to be with her in her final days because she was afraid for her life. My dad was told to leave the family behind, and he kind of found out how they died. But imagine you're the only one left in your family, and you got nothing. You've lost all your physical property. You lost your ties to where you grew up, and you were on sheer survival. Now, my dad, he was a pretty gutsy dude. He went and fought, and my mom somehow she survived.
She stuck with him while he fought.
She was in the labor camps, and my dad was fighting for the Polish resistance.
Yeah.
They reunited, back here in the U.S. That's pretty doggone gutsy. And then they come here and they have literally nothing. They don't even have a close relative. That relative lived in California, my father's side, and was from California. They finally moved to California. He was actually in New York, but they didn't have much close family here. They had a Jewish community that kind of looked after each other, but there wasn't really that close bond there. That's the difference in America versus Israel. You go there and there was those communities, the whole community family thing is much bigger in Israel than it is in the United States.
Because it was more concentrated?
It was more concentrated.
Kind of tribal in a way.
It's more tribal over there. in Israel.
You kind of made the difference between displaced people, your parents, and saw where I was going with like the current state of affairs. How do you feel about the borders being closed right now to displaced people?
That's a really good question. A difficult issue, complex issue. Talking about immigration and immigration reform. So that's really the policy issue you're referring to. I actually think that dreamers ought to have a pathway here in America to become Americans. They were brought here under no fault of their own, and many of them have acculturated. There are many who came over the border who have acculturated and been a part of our society and have contributed. The uncontrolled borders is really something that's not necessarily, it invites challenges for the country. You have to have some sense of definition of your nation. I don't believe in porous open borders. I know some of my colleagues do, but I don't.
Do you think they really think they should be completely open without anything?
Some people do. There's got to be some way of processing. You know, they're not just being displaced. They're being organized and sent to the border. They're being supported in this route. I understand people who genuinely want a better quality of life for themselves and see America as that place of opportunity. Believe me, my parents saw that too. I love this country because of that. And if I wanted to improve the quality of life of my family, and I lived in South America and I was in the lower impoverished class, I too would probably want a way for a better life. Mm-hmm. So I can't fault those folks who want to do that. But a lot of these people who are going on these caravans, these are organized caravans. They're getting support all along the way. It looks like more of a political statement to me.
Don't those big caravans need support to sustain them? Like, it's a long journey.
Yeah, it's a long journey, but who's sending these caravans? And what's the motivation behind it? Aren't they imperiling the lives of these people by not having it supported? Is this like another trail of tears for these people? I mean, America's not the ones sending these people on this journey.
You're right. America's not sending them on the journey, but they're journeying together by some force of their own personal circumstance and maybe some political gesture. But I believe that they come with the intention of finding a better life, and they're fleeing danger. Whether people are capitalizing or politicizing that, I think kind of stinks.
Those folks there who need help, I hope they get it.
I mean, can the caravans come and wait patiently to be processed and then become citizens?
Talking about an issue that I really don't have tremendous amount of expertise in. I do believe that the legal system of processing these immigrants is pretty clogged up. You have the challenge of keeping children with their families. You have the challenge of some of these migrants having children with them that are not necessarily their own. You've got a lot of challenges over there. Should Mexico provide support for those folks on their side? Sure. Should we be more cooperative with them to provide support for these people? Sure. Should we try to get them back to their places of origin and disincentivize them from leaving? Should those host countries do better in their own policies to incentivize more economic opportunity there? Can we find ways to help them sustain themselves and have a better quality of life where they are already from, rather than have them come here? That would be, to me, the best way to go.
They're fleeing, though. Is it like getting here and pulling the ladder up?
What are they fleeing from?
I don't know, their life.
I don't know the conditions from which they're fleeing from.
Yeah.
Depends upon what country. Venezuela, there are a lot of refugees going over to Colombia. I don't know.
I think over 1 million at this point.
I think, it could be more than 1 million, and maybe some are trying to get over to the U.S. I can appreciate their plight because Maduro has destroyed the economy, and used to be the most affluent economy in South America. And now their people are being relegated to hunting zoo animals for food. Food is in dire shortage. I can appreciate they're wanting to migrate.
If they had the same process that your parents had at Ellis Island, would you be okay with the system?
Well, you got to understand there were a lot of Jews that were turned back earlier on.
But what about afterwards? Did it open up more?
I believe it did, but that system is, you got to have a sponsor, you got to be disease free, you got to have a job. I think those were the requirements.
Okay, so if those are the requirements now, it would be easier to be supportive of it.
Sure, of course.
Yeah, I think some people say that there's a kind of a compassionate case for immigrants who are sick and won't be admitted.
You're talking about a very difficult thing to administer without literally thousands of people coming to the border.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. It's a very difficult situation. And, I don't know how much of this is contrived. It's very difficult to manage. It is a crisis on the border. And to politicize it is wrong.
I agree. To politicize it is wrong. Is diversity good?
Of culture, of people?
Yeah.
Sure. Of ideas? Sure. Of course.
What do you know about the American Indian Wars? Part of our week is around reconciliation and our history. And what were you taught about them?
As I remember, I'm 63 and I haven't really gone to school in around 40-something years. So to try to remember what I was taught is really kind of difficult.
What are things that you remember now?
American Indian Wars, the relationship between the colonists and the Indians and how that evolved. I do believe that the first settlers came here motivated by desire for religious freedom and an opportunity as well. And they saw this new land as that. Some people believe that these settlers referred to the U.S. as the New Jerusalem, the New Israel, the Promised Land, because it was so ripe with opportunity. Mm-hmm. And I do believe they felt like they were blessed to be here. It was very difficult trying to forge a settlement in barren territory and not knowing the native people, whether they were, friendly, benign or not. I imagine that was an extremely difficult life. They built these communities and, they had deals with the Native American people and it's one of constant reneging on those deals.
Reneging?
We didn't honor our deals with Native Americans.
So we kept making deals in order to survive and then renege?
In order to survive, expand, and grow and prosper. It's not the greatest part of our U.S. history. I do believe that founding of America and the growth of America and the birth of the nation and its independence from Britain and the freedoms that were ensconced in our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, are really, truly revolutionary. This is the first time in the world, in history, that people agreed that we were endowed with certain inalienable rights from our Creator.
Manifest destiny.
This is from the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah, but manifest destiny is the idea that God provided the land for basically Christianity and Christians to take over and conquer.
Well, that's a separate issue, manifest destiny versus the actual form of government we wanted to create here in this country that would promote and protect these inalienable rights of life, liberty. It was property. They took it out and changed it to pursuit of happiness. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Among these rights were the rights to life, liberty, and happiness, and pursuit of happiness. There were other rights, too, that the Creator endowed us with. And this country was developed in order to protect those rights and give people opportunity, which is revolutionary. Before, it was all your rights were determined by a king, by some controlling form of government, an institution. Mm-hmm. And then you had the Constitution of the United States, which said, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, a more perfect union. It didn't say a perfect union, it said a more perfect union, which means that any form of government or system or society certainly has inherent goodness within it. It's not perfect because we're not perfect human beings. If we were perfect human beings, we wouldn't be here. We constantly have to choose in our daily life, in our decision making, whether we choose to do good or not, or choose to do harm. Mm-hmm. That's a fundamental choice that we each have to make. So we had settlers in this country who came here for freedom and opportunity, and you saw explosive growth in this nation. And because we had that form of government in place to secure these freedoms, we had some of the greatest innovation the world has seen in a little more than 200 years that either happened here in America or was inspired by these freedoms. And I don't think that's debatable. However, in that pursuit of freedom and opportunity, you had people who didn't act, for what we call mutual benefit. You had people who misused the system. And certainly people got hurt along the way. And it's unfortunate our treatment of the Native American Indians is really kind of a more than a blemish. It's a scar within our country.
The Creator didn't give the land to them.
I'm not saying the Creator didn't give the land to them.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that at all.
Well,
I wouldn't say that it's all one or another.
Well,
we're all here together now, and you're talking about diversity. So
we're kind of here together. I mean,
and the planet was, the population is increasing, and people were seeking opportunity. I think that it's inherent within the individual to constantly want to self-improve.
I mean, do they have to participate in Western culture, the tribes?
Did they have to?
Yeah, I mean, in order to
that
live
was our
this-
mindset at the time. We thought that they should participate in Western culture because we thought our Western culture was superior to their culture, and hence that's probably the seed that germinated the problems. You can't force anybody to do anything they don't want to do. It's not in their best interest, and it's not ingrained within them and in their culture. So trying to force them to be like us is a total mistake. You let them be who they are.
Where should they live?
Now or then?
Where should they live now?
Where should they live now?
Yeah.
That's a really good question, Tate, because we have completely, I wouldn't say completely, but our social welfare system that we have created within Indian nations has institutionalized poverty and dependence within those nations. All the money we pour into Native America, it's a tragedy what's gone on to their culture. We've essentially almost destroyed their cultural identity. Their practice of their sacred rituals was prohibited until fairly recently. Imagine if the Jewish people were prohibited from doing their Sabbath services in America, or the Catholics were prohibited from doing Mass on Sundays, and they couldn't pray the way they wanted to. I mean, you're seeing that today, Tate, where churches and religious institutions were not considered essential in certain states of America. But you see liquor stores, and I have no problem with people, if they want to smoke pot, go to it. But weed shops, liquor stores, and et cetera, they were deemed essential, but churches were not. So what has happened during these lockdowns, Tate?
Well,
and people being forced to stay at home and not being able to socialize and with other people engaging in practices that enhance one's connection to each other and connection to a creator or higher power, whomever you want to refer them to.
Yeah.
Because the Native Americans have their connection and their way to do it, and the Catholics have theirs, and the Jewish people have theirs. And when you cut off people from their source and from each other, and you cut them off from their ability to engage in commerce, and to me, commerce can be a spiritual thing too, where you create something of value, whether it's a service or a product, and someone likes it so much they will buy it from you. And not only do you reap the reward of income, you reap the reward of personal satisfaction of creating something of value for another human being. I know you know that because you do these programs. You wouldn't be doing these programs if you didn't believe in it and didn't get some intrinsic or extrinsic reward for that.
Yeah.
Right? And people wouldn't watch it if they didn't have any value. You cut people off from doing that, and what you've had is an increase in depression, an increase in domestic abuse, an increase in suicides. Just in the last 6 months since this COVID shutdown mandates have been in place around the U.S. We cut Native Americans off from their sacred rituals. We force them into reservations. We dump food onto them that's not native to their culture. They don't process alcohol like we do, apparently. We created alcoholism among these folks. They escape with drugs is rampant. And then you have the problems on the home front with spousal abuse and problems with the children. And now you got problems with children from reservations being trafficked, because we have basically helped destroy the identity of these people. And that's tragic. That's bad.
One of the things that I had thought about with you and this topic is not being told what to do, not wanting to be told what to do.
Right.
And that definitely ties in. There aren't crowds in a liquor store or a dispensary. I don't think they said people couldn't congregate. I mean, they could have gotten creative and done it outside or Zoomed it. And I get it that it's not the same as building a community. I totally get it.
That's the whole thing about who gets to determine what's essential and non-essential. Do you really want an external force like the government to determine that for you?
Probably not, no.
No, you don't, because you don't know who's going to be in power or what their motives are. and what they want to do to other people. We want to be able to determine what's essential. The marketplace ought to determine that, Tate, not a government.
What does the United States mean to you?
I'm a first-generation American, and I value that a lot. Why do I value that a lot? Because I love this country. I love Montana. I grew up in the Bronx, like I told you. I probably have more people in the borough of the Bronx or within maybe a mile of where I used to live in Manhattan than we have all of the state of Montana. So coming out to the great outdoors, enjoying the rivers, enjoying the mountains, being able to hike the trails, being with good people that I can trust, it's a great thing. And being able to pursue my passion with limited interference. There is interference, but limited. It's a beautiful thing. Knowing what my parents went through to come here, I mean, they could have chosen to go somewhere else. They survived, okay? They survived and came here and gave birth to me and gave me life here in this country. Mm-hmm. And I'm very grateful for that, particularly for what they went through.
Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah. And I would like future generations to cherish that as well, even though I fully recognize we're not a perfect nation, because you can't be perfect in this world, okay? It says a more perfect union, not a perfect union. We can be a more perfect union.
Sure. So acknowledging that imperfection and constant growth and betterment.
Constant innovation and improvement.
Yeah. You founded the Tea Party movement in Montana?
I'm not in Montana. I never say I'm a founder of any of the Tea Party, anything.
You were a good inspiration of the movement in Montana.
Yeah, I was a co-founder of the Bozeman Tea Party.
Yeah.
I never said I was a founder because I didn't want my opposition to have only one target to go after.
Okay.
And the Montana Tea Party Coalition is something that I helped initiate. There were other people involved in that as well.
What do you like about it?
I love the fact that it was brand new at the time and that we kind of coalesced with people who really believed in liberty and freedom, that were free of partisan politics, that were there because they loved freedom and liberty. They saw the threat of an ever-expanding government, the threat of massive government spending that was... it wasn't just Obama. It started with Bush. It started with presidents well before then, but it really accelerated during the big bank bailout under...
2008.
Yeah, 2008.
Yeah. So was 2008 the kind of sparking moment for you in this movement?
It actually brewed over into 2009.
Okay.
When I got a phone call from Joan Stanley. She was in Phoenix, Arizona during that time, called me up and said she wanted to do a Tea Party rally on April 15th, 2009. And that she wanted to know if I would help her. Never spoke to her before. I used to have the radio show on the local talk station, and one of her friends referred her to me. I thought about it overnight, prayed about it a little bit in the morning, and I could just sense in my being that this was going to be something really important. And I looked up on Joan's Facebook page, and she said she was an insurance fraud investigator, and I figured, well, that was good enough for me, because what was going on was a total fraud.
And so she was an insurance fraud investigator by day, and then her kind of activism project at night was this.
Yeah, I think she probably was beyond the insurance fraud investigation period of her life, but she came up to Bozeman.
Oh, I see. That was like her past history,
Yeah,
and then
right.
evolved.
Right. She came up to Bozeman where she had a place, or Gallatin County. She had a place in Three Forks. I asked a group of friends, I think it was early, not too long thereafter. I used to do monthly meetings, and I asked them if they would join me in launching this Tea Party and doing this rally, and they didn't hesitate at all. So we had it going. And we did that first rally on tax day 2009, and there was a half a foot of snow the night before, believe it or not. But we wound up having 500 people. And
You rallied?
Yeah, we had 500 folks.
And that was past tense.
Right.
What happened?
Well, then we had a big rally. No one expected anything from us that first rally. I didn't know what to expect either. But despite half a foot of snow, these people came out, and we marched up from the library to the county courthouse, and it was just a really inspiring day, really inspiring. And then we figured we'd do one on July 4th, and then our opponents kind of got wind of it, and they
Who are your
obstructed us.
opponents?
I had the head of the Public Works, Department of Public Works, who refused to give us a permit to close down Main Street.
No.
Yeah, she said because on TV in a TV interview with KTVM, she said one of the reasons was we were, quote, not a community event. That was not even one of the criteria for evaluating our application. And we all lived in Gallatin County.
So they wouldn't let you have this second rally on July 4th?
They wouldn't initially. And I told my friends, we're going to leverage the heck out of this.
Yeah.
So we went down to the city commission, around 80 of us. And we shared with them what we thought about that decision. Mm-hmm. The city commission relented and gave us a permit.
As they should have.
As they should have from the beginning. Then I had some people I used to work with on other issues. One of them turned on me, and it was pretty nasty, but that's okay. That's the way it goes. I said, friends, don't get angry. Just come out and join us on July 4th. We had over 2,500 people on Main Street.
Wow.
All
That's
8
good
city
momentum.
blocks were filled, and it was a great turnout. But it was much harder because now I had those who supported the current administration. Granted, I want to emphasize we opposed expansive government and the threat of massive spending, and we opposed the consequence of that, which would be increased taxes. We also opposed intrusion in our lives, but those are the reasons why we rallied. It wasn't because Obama happened to be president. This thing was set into motion well before he came into play, and it was accelerating under his watch, and we were all concerned.
Mm-hmm. And it kind of seeps into today because you hosted an event on funding endless wars.
We did host an event on ending endless wars rather recently, and that's a peculiar thing because I used to work with the Afghan people during the Soviet War to make sure they had what they needed to survive and to win. Now you fast forward, now it's more than 19 years since we were there, and there was no clear mission in Afghanistan. The initial objectives of decimating Al-Qaeda and of the Taliban and getting Osama bin Laden, those have been accomplished. We should have been out of there no later than 2011. We could have gotten out of there within a couple months of being there because we did have bin Laden encircled in Tora Bora. You might recall that within 2 months of being on the ground, he was encircled in the area near the Pakistani border. And for some reason, we stood down and gave him an extra day and he escaped.
Because we wanted oil.
I don't know what the reasons were. There's a lot of reasons for it. Again, when you talk about wars, and the president spoke about it recently at the State of the Union, and Eisenhower spoke about it earlier, and Washington warned about it in his farewell address. Beware of foreign entanglements. Eisenhower talked about the military-industrial complex, and Trump talked about generals and others who want wars because they profit from wars. So there's all kinds of motives to it. And that's what we're kind of going up against, this political establishment that, that's what they believe we're going up against. But we're going up against this entrenched political military establishment that continues to engage in wars without any purpose, without any of our national interests at stake. And we're sending our fine men and women to battle, and they're coming back wounded physically and psychologically. And we're spending enormous sums for their care when they come back, which we should provide for their care. And for what good reason? Why do you think we're having so many suicides among veterans today? Because they go to war and they see the horrors of war, and they don't see any purpose for these horrors to even have occurred. What great purpose is being served in Afghanistan, Iraq, or Syria, or Yemen, or anywhere else? At least my dad suffered terribly. They didn't know about PTSD back then. Or my mother, they were heroic in the struggle, but it's the after effect when that struggle was over. They live with the memories of it.
Mm-hmm. There was more of a purpose with your parents as opposed to nowadays.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Same with Vietnam. It all started with the Vietnam War, having purposeless wars. At least our veterans, when they come home, they are loved. When I was a kid, when I was a teenager, when the Vietnam veterans returned, they were thrown eggs at and rotten tomatoes, and they were battered on top of seeing the hell of war. And we should not be doing this, Tate. It's crazy. Now, I would challenge people from all political perspectives. This is not a Republican issue. It should be an American. It's not a Democrat. We should see people from all political sides come together on this issue because it's a right issue. Who cares if it's President Trump leading this right now. It's a right issue.
Well, let's go.
If Obama would have done it, I would have gotten behind that. You know, if Bush would have gotten out early when he should have, I would have been behind that as well.
Either one, as long as they ended after the initial goal.
After the initial goals that we all agreed to as a nation, there's the authorization for the use of military force that gave the president authority to act against those responsible for 9/11 and terrorist activities. It's been way overextended.
Did you vote for Bush?
I did vote for Bush.
Did you vote
Yeah.
for him the second time after he had made that decision to bypass Congress?
Probably. I don't recall. I came to my awakening over a period of time, by the way. My awakening came, and most acutely came, this past year when I read the Afghanistan papers in the Washington Post. I don't know if you know about that publication. It's a series of articles done by one of their investigative journalists. And he interviewed the head of the Afghan, I forgot the entire title to it, but there was a post that Congress created to review what had happened to all the funds that were appropriated for the war. And as part of that project, they also wanted to interview policymakers involved and those on the ground to find out what really happened. And Seagar, Special Investigator General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. I forgot the guy's name who headed it up. But the head of Seagar had this project where he interviewed all key people involved in that war. And what I discovered was that the generals were lying to America. They were misleading America about what was going on the ground.
So they could keep it going?
So they can keep it going and justify the war. Among them was John Mattis. Among them was the Joint Chiefs, chairman of the current Joint Chiefs of Staff, who are telling Americans that, oh, the Afghan National Security Force is a force to be reckoned with, and that's the greatest fear the Taliban have because they know where and how the Taliban fight. Complete farce. The Afghan National Security Forces was a disaster. The war on opium was a failed war. But the public pronouncements of how well it was going before Congress compared to what was actually going on the ground was so stark, it really shook me to the very core. I was already against it before that time, but that completely sealed the deal for me. And I would recommend any of you watching this interview or listening to it to go read the Afghanistan papers. If you have any doubt whatsoever, please don't make it an issue about whether you like the president or dislike the president. Just look at the policy itself and do what is right for the American people and those men and women in uniform, and bring them home from Afghanistan and other areas of conflict where we have absolutely no business being in there.
No endless wars.
No endless wars.
Columbus Day or Indigenous Peoples Day, do you partake?
I don't partake in either at this point in my life. I'm actually working today. I would just say this. I don't know how Indigenous Peoples Day is celebrated. If it's celebrated to honor the indigenous peoples who are here and were here, I have no problem with that. I would not have no problem with both celebrations happening simultaneously and in harmony and with mutual understanding. There are two views of what happened in the founding of America, and there are two views of who Christopher Columbus was. I actually hold to the view that he was a great explorer and a man of faith, not perfect. And believe me, there's nothing in me that would support the enslavement or suffering of any peoples. But the allegation that Columbus had slaves or brought slaves back to Europe, that's really disputed. Some historians believe that Columbus treated the natives well and urged his crewmen to do the same, that he capitulated and made a really bad deal with a mayor in Santo Domingo, and he allowed slavery to occur. That was a bad decision, one of political expediency, because it was a very complex political situation that emerged there. But he wasn't this merciless conqueror of the Americas as he's being portrayed. And this whole thing is this divisiveness that's being foisted on us by certain elements is not healthy for Native Americans or for Caucasians. Why is it either or? Why can't indigenous peoples have their day and people who love Columbus and the founding of this country and what it stands for us?
So keep both.
Keep both. Why not? Why not? Let's celebrate Native American traditions. I would love for that to happen. Have Native Americans honor their ancestral traditions, learn their language, learn their customs, learn and practice their rights, consume the foods that they consumed that is native to them, that is healthy to them.
The United States went too far with all of that.
Sure, man. Forcing them on reservations and not allowing them to practice their faith and their belief system, and forcing food upon them that was not healthy to them, and giving them access to alcohol, which they don't process well at all. Terrible. Giving them blankets that were disease infested, I'm told. I mean, this is
smallpox. Yeah.
Yeah, this is just awful.
Should reservations exist?
I wish there weren't reservations. I wish there was more respect, mutual respect there. I don't like the system myself. I don't like the fact that these federal funds flow into these reservations. You've got tribal authorities that are set up. Unfortunately, it's hard to account for where all those funds go. If you give people funds without having them earned it in some way, you're incentivizing and institutionalizing poverty.
I mean, didn't they earn it by selling us, parentheses, the United States?
That's a good question. That is a really good question. Those who earned it when it was earned, I don't know what those contracts were like. I don't even know if those contracts were even just.
As it perpetuates, people learn to work on that budget and don't. Yeah.
It's not working. That's what I'm saying. It's not working because it has institutionalized poverty and has destroyed the individual's natural desire to self-improve and to innovate, to be self-sustainable. It's dependent upon the federal trough. Look at the quality of healthcare in Native American reservations. It's terrible. The quality of education needs to be improved. Is there entrepreneurship that's going on in Native America? In some pockets there are, but it's extremely difficult in that culture. So should they live on reservations? Those who are more, I'm not an expert in this field, so it's difficult for me to really answer this question, but I do believe that some of the more successful Native Americans have left the reservation, who have actually, developed their own businesses and created value for others and were entrepreneurial. Of course, you got those on Native American reservations who are part of the institution of government there, and they've gotten federal funds, and some have become affluent merely because of the way that the federal support, and their families have as well, but it's not really the way money ought to be earned because others are still impoverished.
Yeah, I think actually you just reminded me of, there's this thing called brain drain, where when people flee a certain area, they lose the mental power to problem solve and get themselves out of it. And so maybe that happens to the reservations. You described people leaving the reservation to assimilate to the United States and pursue that culture, but
I don't think they're leaving to assimilate. I think they're leaving to survive. I think they're leaving for a better quality of life. I think they're leaving for greater opportunity because they don't see it necessarily where they are.
Yeah, you're right. But
some of them
but why
return.
Why not stay and create that again, as opposed to just leave?
I'd love to see that happen. The institutions on the reservations would need to support that. I've known some people who've done yeoman's work in Native American country to help support entrepreneurism there.
How do we reconcile it? Is there a reconciliation to be found
between Native Americans and
settlers? You framed it as settlers. They might frame it as colonizers.
How is reconciliation to be found? Well, not being reconciled and holding on to enmity is very divisive and it's not very healthy. So how do you reconcile when you have, first of all, there's got to be some understanding of the nature of the problem. Personally, if you do something wrong, you ask for forgiveness, you engage in acts of redemption, and then people can actually forgive and trust.
Has the United States done that?
Well, I think we've done it by providing all this support.
By giving them this endless funding and this perpetuated thing that keeps them just below the poverty line and kind of there.
Keeps them almost entrapped. Yeah, I don't think that's the way to go. So how do we get there? I don't know. I think it comes from within the individual's heart. I think people need to let go. My parents had to let go of the past the best they could. I had to let go of the past. We all suffer. I'm not going to equate my level of suffering with anybody else's level of suffering. I'm not trying to do that here. But people have to let go of some of the suffering of the past in order to move into the future. And you can't force anybody else to do things to help you get there. You got to strive to get there on an individual level. So how do we reconcile that? It's a very complicated question. Very complicated question. I don't know the answer to that. But if I don't want to live in resentment and hatred, because that's bad for the individual. There's got to be a way for the individual to achieve some sense of inner peace with it. And everyone's path is different.
Is there anything alive for you right now that this kind of stirred up?
And I do believe we're capable of overcoming any adversity and any challenge. And I do think that applies to all Americans, Native Americans, African Americans, Hispanic, Asian, all across the board. And we need to do this together. You mentioned diversity earlier. This whole thing about the emphasis on the differences among the races, I don't believe it's a healthy thing for the country. We got to find some commonality and some unity. We can't be pitted against each other and expect to be able to overcome.
You're from the Bronx. You experienced Black culture probably more than anyone in Montana has. Is there systemic racism?
I like looking at what's the way out of this mess. How do we move forward?
Well, I think that moving forward would be first to acknowledge and reconcile with people who felt that they had been wronged.
I don't know how people define reconciliation. In terms of a policy level, I would say that we need to continue reforming the criminal justice system. I believe that the First Step Act is a step in the right direction.
From Henry Kriegel's perspective, it's all really about overreach and a government attempting to define life and liberty for people who know better. The United States government's job in all of its local and national capacities is handling what it was designed to handle by the originating documents that define it. That is all. We, as American citizens, have the equal responsibility across all real, social, racial, and societal boundaries within these 50 states to consider one another in our pursuit of happiness, to realize that we aren't perfect and that, as humans, we can't be perfect, but that with the constant innovation and growth of which we are entirely capable, we can be a more perfect union. Are these ideas radical? Divisive? Perhaps, but arguably no more than those of our founding fathers, and some disagreed with them as well. It's what defines this free nation. As with the political parade these past several years, the reality seems far less radical than the concept. When that belief has a face, a voice, a history, a context, the story reads different, familiar. It is, after all, one in a million stories that make up the greatest wealth this imperfect union has, or ever will have to offer, its people. A huge thank you to our supporters: Susan Karstensen, Zocalo Coffee House, Whistle Pig Korean, Last Best Comedy, Hatch, Loken Productions, Ben Johnson Photography, Superfluous Industries, and Blunderbuss. A shout out to our media team: Allison Gregory, Pat Loken, Ben Johnson, Jessica Byerly, Shannon Hughes, Nathaniel Johns, Bryant Stersala, and Dylan Weber. Hey, Tay Chamberlain here. Thanks for listening and supporting I Am Interchange. We build our projects to align with the United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Do you have an issue that's riddled by gridlock in your community? Shoot me an email at tate@iaminterchange.org. That's tate@iaminterchange.org. Remember, share airtime and don't ruin dinner.